In section 4-4, we're using corresponding parts of congruent triangles. So, if you remember back in, I believe it was 4.1, we had talked about just congruent figures in general, right? And we said that if two figures are congruent, that means that all of their corresponding parts are congruent, right? So we can talk about the roadmap, the congruency statement, right? Telling us which angles are congruent and which line segments are congruent, all that kind of good stuff. Well, that's what we're going to use today. We are going to use the fact that corresponding parts of congruent triangles have to be congruent. Okay? So let's see, right here, this is the phrase I'm looking for. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. We're going to abbreviate that as CPCTC. CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And that comes back from our definition of congruent figures, right? Yeah. So, how are we going to go ahead and do this proof? Well, let's take a look at what they're asking us to do. They're asking us to, they already have our angles marked for us, so good. So we already have two sets of congruent angles in our two triangles. Everybody see the two triangles they're talking about? Or showing us? Yes? So triangle BKC and triangle CAB. Yes? Okay. They want us to show that line segment KB is congruent to line segment AC. That's what they're trying to have us prove. Okay? So really what they're doing here, and let me go off to the side here for just a moment. I told you guys that when showing triangles are congruent, we end up with this basic structure every time. Right? And this is showing a triangle is congruent to another triangle. And you saw that sometimes we ended up having stuff out here because it wasn't one of our sides or angles we needed, right? Okay. Well, today, if we're showing that parts are congruent, if we're showing that different angles or different line segments are congruent, we're going to have to first show that triangles are congruent. Then we can say one step farther because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, our final reason of the proofs we're doing today is going to be CPCTC. Because we're going to show first that triangles are congruent, then we can show whatever line segment or pair of angles are congruent because there have to be corresponding parts. Okay, so we're adding that one extra step to the end of a proof. Let's see what that looks like. So we want to show that triangles are congruent. So that means we need to have three pieces of information. And we know that angle, let's write that a little neater. Angle KBC, having a hard time today. KBC is congruent to angle ACB, that is given. We know that angle K is congruent to angle A, that is given. And we need another piece of information. Line segment BC is congruent to line segment BC. Excellent. Those pieces of information are telling us something specific. All right, telling us triangles are congruent. You have to be careful how you do this. Remember, the roadmap has to be done a specific way. So my suggestion to you is to take a look at one of the triangles, I don't care which one, and name it. Okay, so Tanner, what do you want to name one of your triangles? BKC. All right, so we could name that triangle anything we wanted. But now we're stuck Now we are stuck in how we name the second triangle. Okay? So notice we went from a single marked angle to the double marked angle to not marked, right? That's how we named that first triangle. So we got to do the same thing in the second triangle. Single mark to the double mark to the not marked. So that means it's going to be triangle CAB. And it has to be triangle CAB. Otherwise it's wrong, folks. Okay? So those two triangles are congruent because of angle, side. All right, so there we've proven the triangles are congruent, but that's not what they asked us to do. They said, prove that these line segments are congruent. So to do that, got a question? You got the answer? Yeah. What are we doing?
You use CPCTC.
That's it. That's exactly it. So we know that line segment KB is congruent to line segment AC because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And those actually are corresponding parts. Because if you look over at your diagram here, or your road map, right there is line segment BK, and right there is line segment AC. They're in the same position in the road map, so that proves they have to be congruent. They're corresponding parts of congruent triangles. Let's take a look at the next proof. In the next proof, they want us to prove that angle C is congruent to angle E. Well, in order to do that, we have to first prove that we have congruent triangles. So, looking at what's given to us, line segment BA congruent to line segment DA, line segment CA congruent to line segment EA. Hey, those are all sides of two different triangles. The two triangles that are shown. So we can go ahead and set those up as part of our three needed information. And we're going to need one more piece. Because we need to show that triangles are congruent, we need three pieces of information. What do you think? What's going to be that third piece of information? All right, so you're talking about these two angles are going to be congruent. And yes, it's because they are vertical angles. Now please remember, folks, there was a problem on your homework that you could not have said, this is from yesterday's homework, that there were not vertical angles. Okay? Vertical angles only occur when you have straight lines or straight segments intersecting like this. Okay? So please make sure that they are actually straight lines or straight segments before you try to say that you have vertical angles. These are, so yes, we can say angle CAB is congruent to, oops, not triangle, is congruent to angle EAD because of the vertical angles theorem. And so therefore, triangle, Akan, how do you want to name the first triangle? ADE. Okay, so ADE. Now let's pay close attention to how Akan named that. She started with the single marked angle, but then she went through the single marked side, right? And then over to our other corner. So for the other triangle, we have to again start at the single marked angle, A. We have to go through the single marked side to B, and then we have our third side, C. Okay, that is the only way we can do it as far as naming it. Once you name the first one, you are stuck in how you name the second one. Okay? And those two triangles are congruent because of side, angle, side. Well, that information tells me that angle C must be congruent to angle E. Why?
Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent.
Awesome. And if you look at your road map, that's exactly what you should see. Angle C congruent to angle E.